Let's get more on this with Henry To. He's the Chief Investment Officer at CB Capital Partners. Henry, good to see you.
Michelle, good to see you too.
Henry, President Xi Jinping and President Buhari signing several economic agreements. Which would you say was the most significant?
I think the most significant by far is the $6 billion loan that you just mentioned, the infrastructure loans that Nigeria desperately needs for them to grow further, because right now the Nigerian is hitting the peak of the economy. Without additional infrastructure spending, say on roads and power infrastructure, Nigeria cannot grow any further at this point.
So, Henry, how do you think that $6 billion fund will be spent?
You know, we're talking about the very basic things that makes in the modern economy. For example, Nigeria has about 200,000 kilometers of roads. Now, 2/3 of those are unpaved. The other area is the power infrastructure. 2/3 of Nigerians don't have any access to electricity, and frankly speaking, that grid is very old, so they need to spend right away. They could use that money right away on those two things, roads and the power infrastructure.
Certainly a lot that needs to be done there, Henry. Another big deal, Nigeria and China signing a currency swap deal. Now the yuan is free to flow among different banks in Nigeria, and it's also been included in Nigeria's foreign reserves. What do you think is the significance of this move?
That's a big deal for both countries. Now, Nigeria is now able to tap into a swap line in terms of economic emergencies. So, for example, 3 years ago, Pakistan did the same thing, where they tapped into the UN swap line when they were running out of reserve. Now Nigeria can tap that if oil prices go down. From the Chinese perspective, you know, China has about $500 billion in swap lines out there with 30 different countries, and it's another evolutionary step to making the RMB an international currency.
Yeah, certainly boosting the RMB there. I want to talk a little bit more about this because Nigeria's central bank saying it wants to diversify its forex reserves away from the dollar. And up to now, about 90% of international trades between Nigeria and the rest of the world have been transacted in US dollars. And Henry, as you know, this has put a lot of pressure on the local currency, the Naira, which is one of the world's worst performing currencies this year. Now with the Nigeria-China trades, what does that mean? Nigeria can be all these trades cannot be concluded in the yuan. So what does this mean for the Naira?
So I think for the Naira, you know, it's a fundamental, like the $6 billion loan and all these agreements is just one step towards rejuvenating the Nigerian economy. Now with the Naira, that's a fundamental problem because the currency is still very expensive. Despite oil prices recovering recently, I don't see how the central bank or the government could keep it at the official level at 200 to 1 to the US dollar unless oil prices go back to $50 a barrel. I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Well, let's talk about those oil prices because Nigeria, as you know, big oil exporter. How have these low oil prices impacted Nigeria's economy and the economic ties between Nigeria and China?
You know, it's literally a regime change for Nigeria because, as you know, 90% of export revenues come from oil. They export about 2 million barrels a day. When oil prices decline from $100 to $40 a barrel today, because of that, the Nigerian economy shrunk by 10%. That's over $40 billion of lost annual revenues. The other problem is that at $40 a barrel, there were a lot of projects that were green-lighted 2 or 3 years ago, mainly deep water oil projects off the coast of Nigeria that now not economical. Now, if those projects have been green-lighted and constructed, they'll be adding an additional 50% of production to the Nigerian oil economy. Frankly speaking, that is not happening, so Nigeria really needs to diversify at this point.
Yeah, Nigeria is hurting there, and President Buhari is calling for the trade imbalance between Nigeria and China to be reduced. So what is the likely outcome there? Do you see Nigeria importing less from China, or what does Nigeria aim to increase exports of? Clearly, oil, not one of them.
Sure. You know, at this point, it's not just a fundamental issue that Nigeria has. It's, for the most part, a lot of trade partners with China has the same issue where there's an imbalance of traded goods, including the United States, frankly speaking. But right now, at this point, Nigeria is up to a point where they cannot really decrease or reduce any imports because they are only just importing basic goods right now. Everything has to be approved by the government because they don't have enough US dollars to transact in terms of buying imports. So this is really a long-run issue. If Nigeria wants to increase their exports, they actually need to import more in the short term to invest into the manufacturing sector, say agricultural sector, in order to increase their manufacturing and agricultural sectors for export purposes down the road.
Henry, thanks for your insight and analysis. Always great to see you. Henry To, Chief Investment Officer at CB Capital Partners.